Welcome everyone. We're just letting everyone in from the waiting room and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Nice to see you all. Everyone's coming in. I hope everyone's been staying dry and not flooded out over the last couple of days. It's been kind of wild here.
Yeah, it's pretty windy here on the Big Island.
Yeah. Okay, everyone coming in. For those of you who have been at our past webinars, you know this is a slightly different format for us. We wanted to have opportunities for some discussion in the breakout rooms. So until we get there, though, I'd ask you to keep your mics on mute. But once we get into the breakout rooms, we're going to have time for Q&A and discussion. So thank you all for participating in that way, too. I'm seeing some old friends and some previous grantees. Hi, everyone. We'll just give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I have that it's 10 o'clock local time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I know a few people are still joining, but we do have a lot of information to cover today, and I want to give us plenty of time to be able to talk story and ask questions. So welcome, aloha. I'm Kirsten Faulkner. I'm the Executive Director of Historic Hawaii Foundation, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to today's seminar. Today we're going to be talking about some funding sources from National Park Service, Historic Hawaii Foundation, and other foundations and government agencies that can help with stewardship and rehabilitation efforts for historic properties. We're also going to talk about some sources for educational, interpretive, and other kinds of heritage programs. So before we jump into that, I do want to go over some just logistics of how this is all going to work. This meeting is being recorded, and it will later be posted to the Historic Hawaii Foundation website and to our YouTube channel. So your image, your name, your voice will be part of that recording. So be mindful of that, be respectful of that. You can always mute not only your audio, but your video if you are more comfortable with that. And we do ask that you keep your audio muted until we get to those discussion sessions. We are trying a new system for closed captioning. And so there's a button on the Zoom that allows you to turn on and off closed captioning. This is new to us. We haven't used it before. So it may not always capture the voice to text accurately, but we're doing the best we can. And we hope we'll be able to make some corrections to the recorded version as well. And you can also use the chat to enter your questions, both for the speakers and the other participants. And then after this overview presentation, we'll go into breakout rooms for discussion on some of the more specific funding opportunities. And you'll be able to select which room you want to go into, and you'll also have the opportunity to move in between rooms. So if you go into one and say, well, this isn't quite what I needed, let me go try something else, you're welcome to do that as well. Because this is in a meeting format where we have the opportunity to hear from each other, just want us to be respectful and welcoming to everyone. Historic Hawaii Foundation is committed to having a positive and welcoming experience for everyone. So please be kind, please listen constructively, please comment constructively, and you know, you all know this, and we're a community of preservationists and a community based on aloha. So I really don't have any concerns about this, but it's a handy reminder, you know, just to remember to treat everyone well. So thank you for helping make these virtual gatherings a positive and welcome experience for everyone. This program we're doing today is a partnership between several organizations. Historic Hawaii Foundation is the host organization, and we are a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places in Hawaii. So today we have basically our entire staff of 4 full-time people will be working with us. So I'm Kirsten Faulkner, the Executive Director, and we also are supported by Andrea Nandoskar, our Education Program Manager, and Beth Iwata, our Director of Development, and Michelle Kizik, our Development Assistant. All of us are in various places in Honolulu. We've got Nu'uanu, Manoa, Kaimuki, and Mo'iliili, all on the island of Oahu. This program is a partnership with the National Park Service. Most people know the National Park Service through the National Parks, Memorials, Monuments, and Trails, but they also have a very robust historic preservation national program. And we've been partnered with the National Park Service to offer this kind of preservation training for many years now, and we're really excited to continue that partnership. So we have two people who will be leading the breakout room on National Park Service programs. So Dr. Elaine Jackson-Rotondo is the Preservation Partnerships and History Program Manager. She's joining us from California in the Bay Area. And then we also have Megan Brown, who is the leader of the State, Tribal, Local Plans and Grants Program, and she's joining us from Washington, D.C. So thank you, Elaine and Megan. Also from the Department of Interior is the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. This is a section of the Department of Interior that is responsible for the Secretary of Interior's responsibilities for Native Hawaiians and the Hawaiian Homelands Trust. So this office serves as the liaison with the Native Hawaiian community and coordinates across the different bureaus of the Department of Interior. So we have two speakers from ONHR. Stanton Enomoto is the Senior Program Director, and Lisa Oshiro Suganuma is the Policy Analyst. Stanton is in Hawaii Kai and Lisa is in Honolulu, both on Oahu. And then we were really fortunate to invite a couple of grant-making entities who are going to talk specifically about some of the programs they have available. So many of you may know the Hawaii Council for the Humanities, and they have some really lovely programs to help support humanities and arts-based programs, especially public programming and public history and preservation and access grants. We're expecting Stacy Hoshino, who is the Director of Grants and Special Programs, and he is joining us from Oahu. He'll be in a breakout room with Beth Iwata from our staff as well. And then we have the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which is a national nonprofit organization that was chartered by Congress, but it is privately funded. So I'll just put a plug in to rejoin the National Trust with your membership. You know, do that at the same time you join the Historic Hawaii Foundation, of course. But Lizzie Behringer will be joining us, and she's with the National Trust Grants Office. She's joining us from New York, and she's going to be participating in one of the breakout rooms to discuss the Trust grant programs, including one that is specifically for Hawaii. And so there's some national programs that are available to everyone, but then there's one that is specifically for the Hawaiian Islands, and she's going to be talking about some of those opportunities as well. So just some things to expect today. The course is, of course, about ensuring that special places of Hawaiian Islands are preserved. And we know that the stewards of historic properties need to have access to tools that make historic preservation possible and affordable. And appropriate stewardship depends on both financial and organizational resources that are available to caretakers and advocates. This class today is specifically meant for public agencies, especially those from state and local governments and departments, and also for non-governmental organizations. So that includes nonprofit organizations, Native Hawaiian organizations, so forth. We are focused on grant making and other funding programs through government, foundations, and philanthropic programs. We're not talking about individual fundraising or funding for private owners or individuals or companies. There are some wonderful organizations like the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations or the Association of Fundraising Professionals. There's a Hawaii chapter, and they can help with those kinds of programs. And then for tax incentives, we're planning a future seminar, probably in April of next year, that will talk about ways that private entities can access tax incentives. So today we're really talking about government and nonprofits and those kinds of stewardship groups. So our objectives today are to become familiar with the types of preservation funding, considerations in matching recipients and funders, how to prepare, best practices for successful funding, and spend some time on some specific programs. So that's basically our agenda. We'll be together for about 90 minutes. We'll have an overview that it's applicable kind of across the board. You'll listen to me for a little bit longer. And then we'll offer these 4 breakout rooms. Each is focused on a specific program. You'll be able to select which room to attend, and you can move between the rooms, as I mentioned. And in each of these smaller groups, our presenters will give an overview of what, why, who, when, how of that program, and then have some time for questions and discussion. And we're planning on being in those rooms till about quarter after the hour, about 11:15. And then we'll reconvene for some recap and concluding remarks and you know, just to tie it all together. So that's what we're doing. I will take a breath and then move into the general overview. And again, we are recording this and it will be posted later. So as this information comes at you kind of fast, do not panic about taking notes. We will be posting the PowerPoints, we'll be posting the recording, and you'll have the opportunity to go back and look at the information as well. So generally, before I talk about some of the mechanics or the things to consider, I wanted to think about, why do we do this work? You know, why do we save places? Why do we work to share the stories of place? Why do we use place and preservation to connect together as a community? And that's really what it is. The history of a community contributes to its personality. We're preserving the history of a place through its significant historic resources, and that gives a community its unique character, its connection between past, present, and future. And that link between the roots of the community and its people is so important to quality of life and making a more livable community. I think it's important to remember that preservation involves much more than simply saving and restoring old buildings. This is also about, it's an important investment in the present and in the future. So for many of us, you know, safeguarding the past is reason enough to do this. But there's also other benefits that accrue from these efforts. There's tangible reasons why historic preservation matters. They're economic, cultural, environmental, educational, all of which are connected to one another and to the living memory of involved communities. And because of those additional benefits, some of the funding sources may not be labeled historic preservation funding source. They may be labeled economic development. They may be labeled environmental sustainability. They may be labeled humanities or arts and culture. So, you know, as you think about and start to research what are some of the partnerships or sources available, think broadly, not only about the site itself and what you're trying to do, but what impact does that have to the greater community and how it ties into that greater benefit, because that will lead you towards new sources as well. So thinking about the types of funding, there's several, and you know, I mentioned individual fundraising earlier, but today we're really going to focus on grants and cooperative agreements. And so I wanted to just hit a couple of definitions to help. A grant is an award. It's usually financial, but it could be goods and services, and it's given by one entity to a qualified recipient. So the givers and the receivers are both important to this dynamic. But the purpose is to facilitate a goal. Somebody wants to achieve some public benefit, and they're using these partnerships to do so. In most circumstances, grants do not have to be paid back. There may be conditions assigned to them, and there might be, you know, like a clawback provision if you don't meet the conditions. But mostly, they're gifts to say we, the grantor, are funding you, the recipient, in order to jointly achieve some outcome that we agree is important. A cooperative agreement is a kind of variation on the theme, but it's a legal instrument that provides financial assistance, usually between a federal agency. Sometimes non-federal agencies use them as well, but it's to carry out a public purpose. Usually there's a law that has been passed that says we, the Congress of the United States, want to achieve some public purpose, and we, the Congress of the United States, are empowering one of the federal agencies to do that, and that federal agency is then empowered to work with others to achieve that purpose. And the main difference between a cooperative agreement and a grant is that the federal agency is involved. They have a substantive and meaningful interaction to help achieve that public purpose. And of course, it all has to tie back to what was that authorizing language in the first place? What is what is the public benefit that is trying to be achieved? Then, of course, there's contracts, which is basically a fee for service. You know, you can contract an entity to provide a good or service at a fixed price. And then charitable donations, which are gifts of cash, real estate, stocks, bonds, you know, any kind of legally financial instrument that can be given to a nonprofit entity to help it accomplish its goals and its mission. And what's important about a charitable donation is that the donor does not receive anything of value in return. It's simply motivated by charity and a belief in the public good. There are incentives for that kind of giving as well, usually a tax write-off on the income taxes. But again, we're not talking about that so much, but I want you to be aware of those other funding sources too. So who gives the money? Where does it come from? So some of the most common sources of funding include foundations. These are entities that support charitable activities and by making grants to unrelated organizations, usually for scientific, educational, cultural, religious, or other charitable purposes, which includes all those things we talked about earlier, historic preservation, education, heritage programs, telling stories of place, arts and culture. Foundations can either be private or community-based. Private ones can be a family foundation, it could be a company, a corporation, it could be an individual. And community foundations are public charities that usually focus on either geographic area or a specific type of goal, but they pool together these donations so that they can have greater impact by supporting more community benefits across the board. So of course, Hawaii Community Foundation is a 100-year-old organization that supports the Hawaiian Islands. And we are going to be talking about some of their programs in one of the breakout rooms as well. So those are really important sources. And then there's government programs, financial awards, technical assistance, and besides the federal ones, there are also state programs and local programs. So all 4 of our counties have different grant-making entities as well. And then there's nonprofit organizations. So for example, Historic Hawaii Foundation both seeks funding from these other programs, but we also give funding. And so this nonprofits can be both. So a business or a corporation that has tax-exempt status, then granted by the IRS because that organization operates for charitable purposes. So those are some of the funding sources, you know, who has money and who's giving it away. And then there's the qualified recipients who can receive the funds. Many funding sources are limited to certain types of recipients. And this gets back to what are you trying to achieve? You know, if it's an educational goal, you're more likely to be working with an educational institution. If it's to promote the benefit and well-being of Native Hawaiians, it's more likely to be a Native Hawaiian organization. So a lot of the eligibility for these different programs will start with who is eligible to get the money. So always check that, and you know, so you don't start chasing something that your organization doesn't meet. So here's an example. This photo is at Haipai o Heia, which is both a nonprofit organization and a Native Hawaiian organization. This is an 800-year-old fish pond in Kaneohe on Oahu. And they received a Historic Hawaii Foundation grant to help restore a segment of the enclosure wall at Heia Fish Pond. You know, remove the mangrove, restack the stones, rebuild the wall that had been damaged by storm surge over many years. So I guess my point there is you can be more than one of the above. You know, you can be a nonprofit and a Native Hawaiian organization and a charitable organization and so forth. So the really, I guess, key or the archstone for all of this is finding the fit between the entity that has the money and the entity that is receiving the money, and working together to achieve that common purpose and that common goal. And all of those variables need to be in place: the focus of the funder, the nature of the project, and the capacity of the applicant. We want them all to come together. So funders will review projects for consistency with their priorities and goals, and will support certain types of projects more than others. It's important to understand both the nature of the project and then how it relates to the interests and applicability of those potential funding sources. So here's an example from Haleiwa on North Shore on Oahu. This was a historic interpretation signage program. They were putting these brass plaques on the sides of different buildings that tell, about the history of that building and who built it and why they built it and when they built it and how it was being used and so forth. And then also there are a couple of kiosks that are being installed that will have some maps and some additional information, QR codes, and more of that interpretation. This program was supported by 3 different grant programs. The National Trust for Historic Preservation was interested in the project because it helped showcase that preservation can be an economic tool for historic Main Street communities. So that was their purpose and goal. And they said, yeah, fit, check. The Hawaii Tourism Authority was supportive because it enhances the visitor experience to understand that Haleiwa is more than just a place to get, lunch or shave ice. They wanted to ensure that visitors to the islands get more of a sense of authentic, what is this place really, and not just food trucks. And then the Atherton Family Foundation was supportive because the project benefits the local community and enhances a sense of place. And that family foundation is very broad in its goals. If it's good for Hawaii, let us know what you're doing. So that's an example of how 3 different programs have 3 different emphasis, but they all came together in the same project. So, to kind of think through what are some of the potential partnerships here. So here's another example of finding the right fit. As you research for funding opportunities, and so again, look at the parameters of funding and the goals and the capacity of the recipient. So here's a side-by-side comparison. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has the Sam and Mary Cook Preservation Fund for Hawaii, and it supports preservation planning, design work, but not property acquisition. You can do sort of that upfront planning and exploration and putting your goals together and what's your strategy, but it's not going to say, here's a bunch of money to go buy that land. And by contrast, the Legacy Land Fund for the state of Hawaii is geared towards acquisition of significant historic and cultural lands, but not rehabilitation or maintenance of historic buildings. And they have historic and cultural lands as one of many programs, but also agriculture, watersheds, habitat, coastal lands. So looking again at what are those eligible applicants, eligible expenses, and is there a fit that is better for whatever it is you're doing. The other thing to look at is typical funding amounts. These scales are incredibly different. The kind of upfront grassroots, we have a place, let's figure out what to do with it. For the National Trust is that $2,500 to $5,000 sweet spot, where land acquisition for perpetual protection of resource lands forever and ever can be millions. So, those are things to keep an eye on as well. Funders will review projects for consistency with their priorities and goals, and they'll support certain types of projects more than others. So it's important to understand the nature of the project and how it relates to those interests and the applicability of those potential funding sources. I'm going to start going a little faster. I know there's a lot of stuff to cover, but I want to make sure that we have time for our breakout rooms too. Let's see. So all funding is going to come with conditions. There's no such thing as free money. You're going to have strings attached, and it's going to be something you have to be comfortable with. If you can't meet those conditions, do not accept the funds because they are absolutely required. And many will require that it's either designated on the state or national register, that it's performed in accordance with preservation standards, that you have the right people who are working on different programs. So, and I also want to be clear that projects still have to comply with government regulations. So you do not get a free pass on permitting or zoning controls or, building inspections or so forth. And just quickly, this example from Iolani Palace, they received a grant to recreate missing textiles to restore the gold room. And so they used historic photos and scraps of cloth from a tie back on the draperies to research and assess the patterns and the colors of the carpet and the drapes as they appeared during the Kalakaua era. And then they were able to custom fabricate those replacements using that documentary evidence and evaluation. So that level of detail and quality and excellence was required by the grant. This is a National Historic Landmark, so you would, of course, expect them to do the absolute best they can possibly do. It would not have been acceptable if they just, ordered a new carpet from a home furniture store. That's not what we're about here. Another thing to be aware of is how the funds are released. Many foundations provide a cash grant up front, you just get it in a lump sum, but government agencies usually require that the organization expend the funds first and then submit for reimbursement. And then they confirm that the expenditures were used to meet those project conditions. There can also be arrangements where installments are paid as milestones are reached or as reports are submitted. You should know which one it is because you need to think about cash flow planning, especially for really large projects. And if the recipient is going to be incurring expenses before the funds are received, you need to have the resources to manage that. Some organizations will arrange for like a line of credit at a bank or some other funding to cover the bills until they get the money. But be sure to factor that into your project management schedule. And I'll tell you, I hear this a lot about grants and aid from the state legislature. Organizations will be really excited. They got a GIA and they're ready to go, and it can take 2 to 3 years to actually get the money. So you need to really think about what are some of the ways you can handle the bills in the interim, in the meantime. So yeah, keep that in mind. Funding will also require a report. What happened? What difference did it make? So look for those forms, answer the questions, pay attention to the format and the deadlines. Who did what? When did they do it? How much did it cost? What difference did it make? What did you learn? What will happen next? Tell the story. And one of the things we found too was all of funders also have reports they need to make. They need to report back to their partners. They need to be able to include it in their newsletters and their annual reports and their social media. They need to be able to inspire others to also want to participate and continue with this. So think about how you can help the funder tell your story in those different levels of detail. I think it's helpful to remember this rule of thumb, which we think of as the 3-33 rule. So 3 seconds to grab attention, 30 seconds to provide the basics, and 3 minutes for those who want to know more. And so if you think about that as a 1-sentence version, a 1-paragraph version, and then a multi-page version. So when I'm talking to our funding partners about this project in Hanalei, I needed to be able to say, in 1 sentence, here's what happened. And then in 1 paragraph, here's who did what, why they did it, how they did it, and here's what happened. And then a multiple page one that has the financial report, the before and after photos, the answers to the questions and so forth. So just keep that in mind also as you do the project, because you're going to need to gather that information as you go, so you're able to share it later. So that really gets us into the tips and best practices. There's just a few of these, but this applies across the board for anything you're doing. This is not specific to particular programs, but it's always helpful to think about what's the frequently asked documents that they're going to be required. You're always going to have your federal taxpayer identification number or your IRS determination letter verifying tax exempt status or your names of your board of trustees. Think about what are those frequently asked questions or documents that are required and have them ready. You might definitely have electronic copies, but you might want to keep a hard copy as well. Every grant is going to be different. So they ask for what they need and all they need. Less might be better, more is not necessarily better. And especially if they're getting a lot of submittals, they will not have time to review 1,000 applications that are 1,000 pages each. So don't overwhelm the recipient or the funders with too much information. Be aware of things like word and character count and size of fonts. Don't submit something with 8-point fonts and 1/4-inch margins. They will throw it out immediately. Think about number of pages, labeling of files. Be aware of time zone. What are the working hours of the organization? So if you're seeking guidance or information in another time zone, and you're getting impatient that they didn't get back to you, but hey, they're 6 hours ahead. It's midnight there. So just pay attention to things like that. Many grantors or funding providers will have orientation or tutorials or videos or information about their programs. And, especially now, a lot of them are online or they'll have informational sessions that you can attend and learn more. Many grants are now taking only online submittals. And so, you may have to register for those, get a login information, so know your username and your password. Sometimes it takes a couple of days to set that up. So don't do it, 2 hours before the submittal is due, because, hey, what if your network goes down? So make sure that all of that is done in advance and you know how to find it. The other thing we found is because of that online submittal process, I think it's unwise to work directly on the online submittal. Keep working files separate. Have a Word document where you've copied in all the questions and you work through your answers, and you can edit it and you can have other people read it. You can check the word count and you can save that and then copy and paste it in. And of course, make sure it doesn't get cut off. But that way you have a record. You know exactly what you did. You have a chance to refine it and get it ready, and you can reuse it later. And you can also refer back to it when you're doing the program and doing the reporting. So it's pretty important to have those working files as separate from the formal submittal. Another thing is there will always be, almost always, attachments and exhibits that are required. So understand what those are. Is it photos? Is it a budget template? Is it some resumes or professional qualifications? Are there bids required? Are there maps? You need letters of support. So think about or read through the instructions, make sure you know what those are and you have them. The other thing is, please name them and have some kind of naming convention that makes sense. Do not attach something that says Xerox scan 44238. That means nothing. You want to have some kind of convention that will make sense to someone who's trying to keep these organized. Even something that just says resume, that doesn't help. You want Kirsten Faulkner resume for HHF. You want to have it so these files will make sense to the recipient. So many of these requests for proposals will have narrative sections and they'll have questions. And the grantor is asking these specific questions based on what they need to know. So they have a purpose, and try to answer them as completely but also as concisely as possible. Assume that whoever is going to be reviewing and reading and evaluating these proposals doesn't already know you. Or if they do know you, they may not be able to take that into account in their formal evaluation and scoring. And so make sure you have sufficient information for that cold reader to understand who you are, where you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it. And don't just think, oh, they already know that already. I'd rather use that character count for something else. And then again, don't send tons of additional information. If they need more, they'll ask. Keep records. This is super important. Once you start receiving the funding and beginning the project, you want to document what you did. Photographs are always helpful. Who was there? Who was involved? What did you spend money on? What happened? Document that impact. The information is going to really be helpful when you go back to report back. Evaluations are great. And in fact, like for today's session, at the end of today, we're going to have a pop-up evaluation that we're going to ask all of you to complete. And that's for two purposes. We want to know how we can improve and what works. And also we're going to use that to report back to our funding partner to say, here's what happened. So, you know, having those kinds of evaluations and assessments is super important. Which takes me to reporting back. All funding is going to require either progress or final reports, or at least, you know, thank you letter. And so be aware of those requirements and the forms and the format and the deadlines. This isn't to say that delays won't happen. Of course they will. We did a program this last year that was delayed 3 times because of COVID. And it had 3 different grantors who had supported it, and we just kept them informed. We said, look, we scheduled this for September of 2020, then it was January of 2021, and then it was August of 2021, and then we finally did it. But keeping them informed and saying, here's what happened, and here's what's going on, and here's why it's going on, most of them are going to be very understanding. So don't just go radio silent, because that's not a good way to handle this. So with that, I'm going to skip over questions just because I want to get us into our breakout rooms. So here's what we're going to do. Each of these 4 rooms will focus on a different program or opportunity. Those presenters will give an overview that'll take 20, 25 minutes and have 20, 25 minutes for discussion. In that discussion period, you can use the raise hand icon on your Zoom controls, and that will pop you up to the top. And so the room facilitators will be able to see who has a question, and then they'll be able to mute or unmute to do that. And then you can also submit questions in the chat as well. So our intent is to reconvene about 1/4 after the hour and come back here for more discussion. Let me tell you what those rooms are, and then Andrea will pop up the selection for you. So room 1 is the National Park Service. This is Megan Brown and Elaine Jackson-Ortondo, and they're going to talk about some of the Historic Preservation Fund programs, as well as some of the focus programs, including Japanese American confinement sites, Native American graves protection and repatriation, underrepresented communities, and more. So that's room 1. Room 2 will be Historic Hawaii Foundation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So Lizzie will be talking about the National Trust programs, and Andrea and Michelle will be talking about the Historic Hawaii Foundation programs. Room 3 is the Native Hawaiian Organization Stewardship Training Program. This is a brand new initiative that we're actually launching later this week, and it will really get started in 2022. So Stanton and Lisa will be talking about what this opportunity is, specifically for training and hands-on preservation activities for Native Hawaiian organizations. And then room 4 will be other, especially Hawaii-based grants and funding programs. So Beth Iwata from Historic Hawaii Foundation and Stacy Hoshino from Hawaii Council for the Humanities will be talking not only about those programs, but the Hawaii Community Foundation, State Foundation of Culture and Arts, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Hawaii Tourism Authority, some of those additional opportunities that are available. So with that, I think, Andrea, how can we do better for Hawaii? So I think everyone's back. Right. Okay. We only have a couple of minutes left in the time we have. I did want to just see if there were any kind of major takeaways or big questions from each of the groups. So Elaine, from the Park Service group, was there anything that you think is relevant or important for everyone? Or something that bubbled to the top? You'll have to unmute.
Sorry, I think it's some of what you had said at the beginning of the starting early, and especially with the federal grants, to become familiar with grants.gov and get into the system before you're even ready to apply for a grant, and look around and have those deadlines for the grants that you think you might be interested in applying, and reach out to folks if you have questions, and learn from others if you know people who have received the grant that you're interested in.
Thank you, Elaine. And thank you, Megan, for being part of that group as well. She's the one who has the grant deadline, I believe, next week, and has probably got a lot on her plate right now. Group 2 was Historic Hawaii and National Trust. So Lizzie and Andrea and Michelle, do you have anything that came out of that group that you'd like to share with everyone?
Lizzie, did you want to share anything? Is she here?
I'm here. I'll just say thank you guys. First of all, thanks for joining us. And if you're interested in learning more about the National Trust grants, there will be info on Historic Hawaii Foundation's website, but I also just wanted to point you to Forum Blog, which is in our preservation professionals community, where we post blog posts after most of our grant rounds that announce who the grantees were and kind of give a little bit of an explainer of projects. So if you're looking for project inspiration or you just want to understand the type of things we fund, you can look there for those blog posts, and hopefully that will help a little bit.
I just wanted to share that it was exciting to be in the group with, and of course we didn't have an extensive amount of time, but at least many of the people in that group, if not all of them, are engaged in saving places and stewarding really good projects. So they do have questions. They're in different phases of their project, but I think it was really exciting to see that.
Michelle, anything to add?
No, it was just great to hear some of the wonderful projects that people were doing in that breakout session. And yeah, everyone's doing some great work. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, Group 2. Group 3 was our Native Hawaiian Organization Stewardship Program. Stanton and Lisa, like to share anything out of that group?
Yeah, we had, well, first I want to thank everyone who joined the group for participating, and yeah, apologize, I ran a little bit long and didn't leave a whole lot of time for Q&A, but we had a couple of questions, one around sort of the possibility of submitting a proposal for multiple years, given a 5-year program. So we kind of addressed it in that, this year we're looking at pretty much a 1-year, maybe 2-year on the outside type of program, and have this be a cyclical type of program going forward. We had another question regarding the possibility of an NHO working with either, say, National Park Service or with the State of Hawaii organization that has historic properties on their site and doing something there. So the interesting idea, I think, it would rely on an agreement between, say, national parks or state parks or whomever and the NHO to conduct that activity. But absent that, other than that, I didn't see a reason why it couldn't happen. But what I forgot to mention, and I kind of want to get it out to everyone, if anyone is interested in responding to the request for expressions of interest, which we hope to get out this week, the registration or sign up for that is on the Historic Hawaii website. So it was on the last slide that I had at the very top was the HTML address, but if not, just call Historic Hawaii and they can help you out and where to sign up. I just wanted to, make sure, people are aware, and please, check it out.
Mahalo, Stanton. Lisa, would you like to add anything from that group?
No, it was a great session, and I guess we want to also repeat the deadline for the expressions of interest will be January 31st, 2022. And it's a 2-step process. So you need to participate in that first step if you're interested.
Mahalo, Lisa. Group 4 was Beth and Stacy. So any takeaways from that group?
I just want to say I'm glad nobody had to pay money to attend because we didn't get to finish. But we did have one question, which I was able to answer. And the video message from Kihau, we didn't get to finish it, and it'll be posted on our website. So Please, if you have any questions, email me, beth@historichawaii.org. And I promise to respond. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I'm seeing some information in the chat about some other program deadlines that are coming up. So pay attention to those too. I know there's several in the coming weeks, both from National Trust and National Park Service. So it's really an exciting time. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to let you know about some other upcoming programs that we have coming on. Let me see if I can just share this quickly and let you know. As part of this series of preservation and practice in Hawaii and continuing our cooperative agreement with the National Park Service, we are planning some technical trainings in the first half of next year. So these dates are all tentative. We'll be refining them as we go, but we're looking at doing one on adapting historic buildings for flood resilience. And this, is becoming very acute and necessary. So we'll be working on that. We'll be doing another funding workshop, but focused on tax incentives. And this is one that's more applicable for private sector and obviously organizations that pay taxes. And then later in the year, we want to talk about some of the regulatory systems and integrating the Environmental Policy Act reviews of cultural resources with the National Historic Preservation Act review of historic properties and how those two systems work together. So those are coming up next year. And then more immediately, we have a couple of Historic Hawaii Foundation programs that are in the next week. So on Friday, we're going to be doing a lunchtime talk story with some students from UH Hilo about a new program that will be also launching a story map telling the history of Hilo. And so this is pretty exciting, and it's, again, free lunchtime talk. And then next Tuesday evening, we'll be doing a presentation on an ethno-historical study for the Merwin property on Maui. So many of you know Merwin was the poet laureate who started a garden of palms on Maui, Keahi. So we'll be talking about the ethno-history. And really the idea here is the land is library was the catchphrase, and ways that land holds the history and holds the memory of a community. So I think both of those will be really exciting and interesting. And then just finally, wanted to thank you all for supporting Historic Hawaii Foundation, for being part of this community. When we close out, you'll see a pop-up evaluation. Again, as you've all just learned, this is important both for reminding our programs, but also for reporting back to our partners for these programs. So we'd ask you to complete that evaluation if at all possible. And with that, I just want to thank you all for being part of this, and wish you aloha and safety for the rest of the day, the week, the year. Mahalo.